one reason I like to train is to be outside. So one of my whys of being a multi-sport athlete and trail runner is the joy of being outside and not inside. The difference is he's a professional, I'm an amateur. That kind of changes things, from that perspective as well.
And a big welcome back to the Endurance Hour Podcast, episode 394. Back alongside Kona coach Wendy Mader, Dave Erickson here. Great questions today on today's podcast. We begin from Kevin in the T2 Endurance group on Facebook. Wendy, have you seen the video on YouTube of Lionel Sanders about 2 weeks ago? He says, why I train indoors. Be interested in your perspective. And both Wendy and I have watched this video, and I've got some good takeaways. What's your perspective on Lionel Sanders' focus on training indoors now?
Well, I think, like the way he starts it is he talks about he lives in Canada. So 6 months out of the year, most Canadian triathletes do train indoors due to weather. He explains how he fell on ice one time. And when conditions are that bad, it's not worth the risk of possible injury to have to train in ice and cold and just not great conditions. So that makes sense to me to train indoors. But then he kind of went on to say how he trains indoors, all year round, even in nice summer or spring-like days when it's, like 70 degrees and sunny and not humid, blah, blah, blah. And he still trains indoors because it's a controlled environment. And that is where I say that's one reason that I like to train outdoors, because I race outdoors in an uncontrolled environment. And so to always train indoors in a controlled environment, in my mind, does not necessarily equate to the elements that you're going to face outside, such as varying terrain and wind, both directions, and rain and anything else you're going to encounter on race day. Also, one reason I like to train is to be outside. So one of my whys of being a multi-sport athlete and trail runner is the joy of being outside and not inside. The difference is he's a professional, I'm an amateur. That kind of changes things, from that perspective as well.
You make a good argument on going outside and dealing with the unpredictability of the conditions and how those will be very similar to a real race situation where you've got weather, you've got terrain, you've got wind, you've got other athletes. I like his consistency point of view on you're able to control the data and your results, or at least you have a little more control over them on how you approach your workout. But also the point you said, he's a professional. This is his job versus the amateurs who have different motivations and different expectations for results. He needs to know what he can do in an ideal situation and then adapt to real life situations. There really is no substitute for going outside, especially when on the bike. Running, you can go outside and you can kind of find a flat terrain. You're still dealing with gravity, maybe some, light breeze and whatever little variations in the terrain. But I think that would probably be the easiest to simulate indoors and outdoors versus cycling, which you cannot do the outdoors and make it the same indoors unless you had some sort of, a Zwift or some sort of comp train or whatever it is that would change the terrain for you, at least the power elements of it for wattage.
Right. So I mean, it's going to the bike, if you're someone who really likes to hold that power, that small power zone of, let's just say 150 to 155 watts for 10 minutes, that's going to be difficult to do outside. Even if you're on a flat terrain, it's still difficult because you have the wind. Even a flat terrain has little bumps in the road. And so your wattage is not going to be that fine tuned outside. And some people are really motivated by getting those metrics and nailing the metrics that they set out, the details of their training that they set out to do or their coach wants them to do. And in my mind, when you're trying to be that close to 150, 155 watts, in my mind, I'm still pretty close if I'm 145 watts, and I'm still pretty close if I'm 160 watts. So my ranges are always going to be bigger, especially when I'm outside, to adapt to that varying terrain. And also, being a professional and an amateur, he can probably spend 5 hours training indoors, but because that's his job, he can probably still go outside at different parts of the day and get that sunshine and the breeze and everything else that I strive for when I'm outside. Whereas an amateur athlete who doesn't have that capability and that freedom to spend 5 hours outside and then spend 5 hours inside. It's just not the same.
There is that also the safety aspect of all of this. You
Oh,
know,
definitely.
a lot of us in the age range that most triathletes are, at least who've been doing it for a while, have families. You've got careers, you've got jobs. You can't really, it is a risk. Every time you and I and everyone listening gets on the bicycle, we take a risk. People
Hmm.
texting and driving, people feeling like they own the road and there's very little shoulder. We take a risk every time we go out there, whether even if no one's out there, you hit some gravel. You lose your balance, you just lose focus for a few moments. And not so
Hmm.
much when you're running, but cycling is a risk. And I can see where that's a smart choice, and it's so hard if you have beautiful weather out. But if you can put your bike and your trainer out there on the patio or somewhere you can see and feel the air and take it in, that might be. But the safety part of it is so important, and I can
Yeah.
see why he can't take any risks. Even when he talked about running back with 10K to go when it was icy and he tripped and rolled his ankle. This is his livelihood. And
Yeah.
for us, there's also an element of livelihood, but also just being active in our non triathlon life with our
Hmm.
family and doing things. So
Right.
I see the benefits of both, and it all depends on your why and what kind of results you're looking to get in the end.
Right. And I'm someone who trains when I was training a lot indoors on the bike. And then usually come June, whether I lived in Colorado or Georgia, June is my time to say it's going to be consistently hot, sunny weather. That's when I'm more consistently outside. And that's also a time where I'm getting ready to do a race in like 8 to 12 weeks. In the fall, I like to get race ready. And that to me means trying to get outside as much as possible to be ready for the fall event.
This question from Julie, which is interesting and realistic. She says, Wendy, I'm racing an Olympic distance this month and was finally able to get in the open water for the first time in years. I was struggling with breathing. Wetsuit seemed kind of tight. Water was cold. Is there anything I can do in the next couple of weeks to overcome this feeling of being anxious in open water, coach?
Well, thanks for asking the question, Julie. I think that's pretty common for inexperienced as well as experienced athletes like myself. The first time we put on a wetsuit each season is usually around, maybe April, May, June, July, when the open water is a little bit warmer and we're putting on a wetsuit. If we've gained a little weight during that, winter, springtime, that could make a wetsuit feel tight. But in general, if we're wearing the normal suggested size for us, it's constricting in the chest. Now, when I started triathlon, I never felt that. I never knew it was something to be aware of. And then just over the years of coaching triathletes and them mentioning how they feel constricted in their chest, I started feeling it the same way. And I know it's just a feeling that happens when you start to put on a wetsuit. And just through the proper adjustments, the proper way to pull it up your body, making sure there's no creases in the legs, making sure you get it all the way up to your crotch, making sure the arms are all the way up to your shoulders, making sure there's a little loose in your neck. You're going to overcome that, especially after you put it on. You're probably boiling hot because now you're like in this wetsuit. Once you get in the colder water, you get water inside, it's going to kind of loosen things up and hopefully make you feel better. And on that note, you want to know, is it the cold water that's making you feel breathless? Because this is the time of year, like most triathletes, when they first get in colder water, it might even not be that cold, but if it's your first time, it feels cold, breathless because of that reason. So I think just kind of acknowledging, is it the wetsuit? If you really think the wetsuit's too tight, try a different one on and see if that's going to cause you to breathe easier than it's the wetsuit, or just try to get more acclimated to the cold water. I wrote various articles. I have various YouTube videos on how to acclimate to cold water and doing the proper warm up and all that. And maybe that'll help you feel less breathless in the wetsuit as well as approaching your first triathlon of the year.
As usual, it's the expectations going in. Know that it's going to be uncomfortable.
Right.
Know that you don't go out as hard as you would in a pool swim. Go out and just put the time in. All right, today is going to be a reacclimation process. Let me just get out there and feel the
Uh-huh.
water. All right. Tomorrow it's
Mhm.
going to be similar, but I'll be a little more comfortable. The next day can be easier. If you're able to you have 2 weeks to overcome this, Try to get in the open water as much as possible, even if it's 10, 15 minutes, just to get the reps in. The more you're familiar with it, the less unfamiliar you'll feel on race day and less
Hmm.
anxious. If you've been there before, it becomes easier. If it's your first time, it always feels odd. But get used to the situation, especially since it's been a few years since you've done that. And congratulations. Welcome back to open water swimming, Julie. This is from Lisa, who purchased our Couch to 70.3 plan on Training Peaks. By the way, you can get 33% off any of our plans on Training Peaks by going to endurancehour.com/33%. She says here that I didn't finish Ironman Barcelona last year, but I signed up again, and this time I will follow a training plan. I struggle with riding hills and understanding cadence. What do you recommend in this situation, Coach?
So first of all, Lisa did purchase our plan. I just want to let our listeners know that with the purchase of any of our training plans on Training Peaks, you can contact me and set up a free consultation, whether it's on Skype, Zoom, or over the phone. And Lisa took advantage of this. And this was just one of many questions she had about cycling and cadence and riding hills. So first off, I recommended that if she struggles with hills, she needs to spend as much time on the hills as possible between now and race day. And she lives in an area with hills, so she just needs to make the choice to say, I'm going to ride a hilly course today, no matter what the training details are, whether it's a recovery ride, endurance ride, tempo ride, or a specific hill repeat ride. She just needs to get out in the hills. That's what I did when I moved to Colorado. I was not a climber, and I just told myself this season, I'm just going to ride on the foothills all year round. And it made me a stronger athlete. And so as far as cadence goes, the best way to measure the appropriate cadence for you is number one, if she had a power meter, because then the power is going to measure the workload, and you're going to try to mimic a cadence that's going to get the desired workload. So for her being a beginner, my advice, and she doesn't have a power meter, my advice was to pick a comfortable cadence, and that's going to change depending on the grade or the length of the hill, and try to just get a comfortable cadence. 60, although 60 RPMs is going to make your legs stronger, that's not the most comfortable cadence for most people. So a comfortable cadence is going to be in that maybe that 70 RPM range. So trying to play with her gears and adjust her gearing and get a feel for what it's like to spin too much up a hill. That's usually going to get someone's heart rate a little bit too high, and they're going to fatigue a cardiovascular standpoint. And I explained to her, get in a gear that's too low and that you're barely turning the cranks over, because that's going to cause a lot more muscular fatigue, and that's not going to be comfortable for you either. So then try to find that happy medium between too high and too low. And the only way you're going to do that is getting experienced riding hills as much as possible.
Good question. Thank you very much. It's a good answer as well. And good luck with Ironman Barcelona 2023. Although she did sign up for the 70.3 plan. How's that relate to the Barcelona?
It's Barcelona 70.3.
Okay. Gotcha. This from Scott. Hello, Wendy. I am 8 weeks into your 24-week Ironman plan that I bought on Training Peaks. I tend to take 2 days off a week and don't feel I need as much recovery as you recommend every fourth week. What are your thoughts on needing recovery weeks? So, Coach, kind of describe why there is a fourth week that is recovery based.
So the way I've set up all our multi-sport plans on Training Peaks is usually a 3-week build, how we're building in either frequency, duration, or intensity. And then every fourth week is a recovery week. And it works out really well. It's just one of many models out there that people use to write training plans. And I think that's the best model for the general population to follow. And these are not specifically tailored plans for the person purchasing on Training Peaks. It's good for them, but it's not specifically designed for them. And so it's the recovery that allows your body to adapt and build fitness if you're following the plan. So I think that's really important. You don't necessarily, if you just had, if over those 3 weeks, we had 6 days a week of training each week with 1 day off, and you were only training 3 days a week, you don't need a full recovery week because you haven't put in the proper volume training load that we suggested, and the reason for the recovery week to allow your body to adapt to what you just did those previous 3 weeks. Now, someone like, I think it was Scott, who asked the question, he's taking 2 days off a week. I think that's fair. You got to adapt the plan to fit your family schedule and other life priorities. And so I would still recommend he follows the structure that we give him every 4th week as far as recovery. Still train the number of days you're training, and still follow the week, with the exception of maybe you add, maybe extra 5 or 10 minutes on the run, or an extra, 15 to 20 minutes on the ride is fine. If you add anything to a recovery week, it's important to keep the intensity load and the extra volume low.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? Is if you follow the plan and the intensity is there the first 3 weeks, or at least you're following it as structured, the 4th week is necessary for growth, for
right, exactly.
building your conditioning correctly. Maybe not, I have no idea. Maybe a person's not working as hard as they can, and that's why they don't feel like they need the recovery. But if you follow the plan as structured, maybe just increase the intensity, so that therefore the 4th week is something you look forward to and is a time to recharge the batteries. If you don't need it, maybe you're not working hard enough. But that's how the body works, right? I mean, you build, recover, build, recover. I mean,
right.
I'm just kind of
right. And some people will build for 2 weeks and take every 3rd week off. Some people won't necessarily schedule the recovery weeks in a training plan, but they do reschedule recovery days, and that works for them, because not everyone needs a full recovery week. If you're personally trained by a coach who's adapting the plan to your personal life schedules and your goals and your fitness level, they're going to be able to know whether you need like a full rest week, or maybe you just need 2 or 3 days of lower volume and intensity and you're good to go. But these are plans made for multiple fitness levels, multiple ability levels. It's just a really good structure to follow. And he's 8 weeks into the plan. I would continue to take those recovery weeks as directed, because as you get more and more into the plan, the training load, volume, and intensity will continue to increase. And so now's the time to get your body used to those lower volume, lower recovery weeks, and you're just able to schedule more things to do with your life during those periods of time. So if you were putting together or thinking about a family vacation, maybe you take it during those recovery weeks.
Without knowing Scott's history with Ironman training and or racing, no matter what he does, whether he follows his, takes yours as a blueprint and kind of does what he wants, either way, it's going to be good data to see what he did and the results. If his plan worked and the results were there, all right, maybe he's the one. But if he didn't follow the plan and the results don't follow on race day, maybe he goes, now I know why. I've been recording these data, and it makes sense now why coach was telling me the 4th week is off. Ironman has nothing to play with. I mean, it depends on what you want your results to be. You don't just like nilly-willy the whole thing and go, I'm okay. Yeah, you may be okay. You can have finished, but how are you going to feel? Did you get was it worth all the investment in time and energy and money to get, an hour slower because you went your plan and not what the experienced coach told you what to do?
Exactly.
That's what I think.
And again, the benefits of keeping a training log, you keep track of all this stuff so you can look back on it and see what worked for you and what didn't work for you.
That's why it's so important to have someone with an outside perspective, hiring a coach to even look at your data and going, you know what, maybe you didn't recognize this, because I have experience. Not only have I done it, but I see athletes do this all the time. I recognize the trends or the tendencies of what happens when a person does A, B. They are expecting C, but they got D. I know why you don't, because you're the athlete in the weeds. I'm the coach who's been in the weeds, but now I'm seeing it from a different point of view that you don't see. That's why I'm a coach and you're the athlete. Trust me. Follow the plan.
Yeah,
I know what I'm doing.
Exactly.
And that's why you hired me. This from Harrison. I rode my first Zwift group ride. It was intense. Do you think riding Zwift events or races will improve my FTP more than the structured rides, Coach?
So for those who aren't familiar with Zwift riding, you can, if you ride on Zwift, it's a cycling app, and you download their companion app, you can join events with other riders from around the world, and you can choose different categories, A, B, C, and D, D being the lower level, a lower percentage of riding at your functional threshold power, A being the highest percentage, up to, 4 to 6 watts per kilogram. So I don't even know if I'm saying the right words, but it's a power-based app. And so what a lot of athletes can do is they can download their training plan details. If it's planned in Workout Builder, they can download that into Zwift and follow their structure, their power, their details. Now, I think it could go both ways. First, I want to say though, increasing your FTP also it involves training at your intensity based on your fitness level and time available to train. And you also have to add a good nutrition protocol and sleep protocol to add those components to help you recover from those harder workouts. I think it's a balance of doing both. Myself included, I used to ride on Zwift, and I think the events and the group rides were really fun because I could average, 22, 23 miles an hour, and it would be a little bit easier for me and I would never be able to do that on my own. It would be too hard. And so that kind of was the fun component to me. And also, I wasn't trying to increase my FTP. I was training for an Ironman. And so you also want to balance, are you in a phase of your training where you're following an 8 to 12 week increase FTP protocol, or are you trying to increase your FTP while you're training for a triathlon? Because those two things are different. Training for a triathlon event is different than training to increase your FTP. So there's a lot of components involved, and I think that's important to know if that's one of your goals, is to increase your FTP. And I think doing the group rides at a high intensity is going to help push you to that effort, but you also have to include recovery rides around that, and you also have to have rides that are specifically meant for you and your schedule and your current fitness.
Great questions from Harrison, Scott, Julie, Lisa, and Kevin this week for the podcast. Appreciate that. If you have any questions that you want submitted on the program, you can visit us anywhere on social media, Endurance Hour, or go to t2coaching.com, email Wendy at t2coaching.com, or t2coachwendy@gmail.com. Is that right?
Yes.
All those combinations will work for asking questions and being part of the program in the near future. I want to finish off a little bit of your recovery where Wendy is, as we've been documenting in so many weeks. Wendy's kneecap reconstruction, and from breaking the kneecap, 6 weeks ago now?
6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
So where are we, and how is the legs responding, the knee responding?
So 6 weeks ago was May 3rd, exactly 6 weeks. And then May 12th will be 6 weeks since my surgery. So the kneecap is very solid. The atrophy in the leg is very weak. And so I'm going to be ready to put my first step on my right leg on May 12th. At that 6 week mark, I can begin putting some weight on my leg for the first time in 6 weeks. I haven't driven, in 6 weeks. I don't know when I'll be able to drive, but I'm really excited. I'm really excited to be able to start to learn how to walk again. The physical therapy has been going outstanding. I went to physical therapy yesterday, and they told me, you're progressing too fast. We have to hold you back. And so kind of that makes me happy. And at the same time, I know this isn't over yet. To me, I'm very present. When I think about what's going to happen in 6 more weeks, I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm not going to predict that I'm going to be running in 6 more weeks. I'm going to predict that hopefully over the next 6 weeks, I will be walking without my brace on and without crutches, and I'll just be able to walk around the neighborhood and enjoy being outside more. That's the first goal for me.
That's great.
Thanks.
Well, we'll keep tabs on your recovery, and I'm sure other people are dealing with their own recovery issues, not as extreme as having a surgery to fix a broken kneecap, but we've all been dealing with something at some point. And to kind of maybe just share your support with Wendy. This is challenging, especially when you've been on the go for 30, 40 years of your life at a high level.
And people ask me all the time, they're always like, how are you doing? How are you doing? How are you doing? And I think the main thing is no one will ever be able to, I think, relate to someone who has been bedridden for 6 weeks until they've experienced that before. Mentally, I've actually always been pretty okay. Like, I know this is temporary. I know it could be a lot worse from people that I know who have a lot worse off conditions than I do. But it is really, it's a big but, and I usually don't say but. It is hard. I'm really tired a lot. I don't sleep well at night because I'm tossing and turning. It's just not comfortable to be on my back. It's hard to stay on my stomach very long. The side is hard because my hip is sore from supporting my body when I walk, especially upstairs. And then my shoulders are sore because I like to crutch around the neighborhood, probably a little bit more than I should, but I like to be outside. And so the difficulty is I'm just tired a lot and I can't move. So after 6 weeks, like, I'm really getting anxious to walk again. I'm pretty patient. I always have been, but it just has its ups and downs. So that's how I'm doing. I'm doing the same as I've been doing the last 6 weeks. I'm having ups and downs.
Well, we want to say thank you again, everyone listening to episode 394 of the podcast. We'll be back next week with 395 with your questions. So please submit those. Join us inside the T2 Endurance Club on Facebook. Join the conversation there, and we'll keep this going. For Coach Wendy, I'm Dave Erickson. Thanks so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next week. Have a great week of racing, training, or recovery. Adios.
Adios.